When hearing the word crusade, the mind leaps to the blazing sun of the Middle East, knights clashing with Saracens outside Jerusalem, the desert heat shimmering on chainmail. But one of the longest running and most territorial enduring crusades didn't happen under the desert sun at all. It took place in the icy forests and windswept coasts of northern Europe, and at the heart of it stood one of history's most recognizable orders, the Teutonic Knights. This is the story of Europe's forgotten crusade. When Pope Urban II called for a crusade in 1095, the goal was simple in theory: reclaim the Holy Land for Christendom. But over the next century, the concept of a crusade began to change. Papal blessings, indulgences, and the idea of fighting for the faith were soon applied to other enemies of the Church, not only Muslims in the East, but also Moors in Spain, and eventually pagans and heretics much closer to home. By the early 12th century, much of pagan Europe had been converted to Christianity, but one stretch remained stubbornly outside the Christian world: the lands around the Baltic Sea, areas like Prussia, Lithuania, Livonia, and Estonia. These lands were home to fiercely independent tribes with their own gods, rituals, and warrior traditions. And here the papacy saw an opportunity: send knights not across the Mediterranean, but into the forests and marshes of the north. In the 12th century, Popes Eugenius III, Alexander III, and Celestine III issued papal bulls endorsing the Northern Crusades to promote Christianity and fight its enemies among the Baltic, Finnic, and West Slavic peoples. Christian monarchs across Europe responded by sending forces to begin the work of conversion, but it was the mighty Teutonic Order who dominated the show. But the Teutonic Order began far from the Baltic, around 1190 during the Siege of Acre in the Holy Land. Originally, they were a small German hospital fraternity, tending to sick and wounded pilgrims. Over time, they evolved into a fully militarized order, much like the Templars and Hospitallers, religious warriors bound by vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, fighting in the name of Christ. For decades, the Teutonic Order fought in the Levant, but as Muslim forces recaptured Crusader strongholds and the Holy Land campaign faltered, the order looked for a new mission, and they found it in an unexpected invitation from Europe's eastern frontier. In 1226, Duke Conrad of Masovia, a Polish ruler plagued by constant raids from the pagan Prussian tribes, made a proposal to the Teutonic Order: help him defend and Christianize these lands, and in return the order would be granted territory to rule. This arrangement was formalized by the Golden Bull of Rimini, issued by Emperor Frederick II, which gave the knights both papal approval and imperial backing for their campaign. And so the Teutonic Knights rode north, trading the dust of the Levant for the snow of the Vistula. From their first footholds in Prussia, the knights waged a relentless series of campaigns against the native tribes. These were not swift wars. Prussians and Lithuanians knew their own land well, its rivers, swamps, and dense forests, and they fought with skill and tenacity to defend it. But the order had something the pagans did not: a steady influx of crusaders from across Europe, siege engineers, and a knack for building stone fortresses that could anchor their control. The knights followed a pattern of advancing into hostile territory, building fortifications on rivers and trade routes, and in launching a series of raids to subdue surrounding tribes. The knights then offered baptism, sometimes willingly accepted, but also sometimes imposed, before integrating the lands into the growing monastic state. It was a crusade every bit as brutal as the wars in the Holy Land. Villages were burned, populations displaced, and pagan temples destroyed. At the same time, churches rose, towns were founded, and the region became tied into the wider network of European trade. However, in many ways, the Baltic Crusades were different from those in the Middle East. For one, battles could take place on frozen rivers rather than under the heat of the desert sun. More importantly, the enemy wasn't a unified Muslim state, but a patchwork of tribes and alliances that could shift from friend to foe in a single season. Further, skirmishes over trade routes and land had occurred for centuries between the peoples of the Baltic regions and the Danes and Germans, making the Northern Crusades more of a climax to a long saga of warfare rather than a new campaign. In the Levant, crusaders were foreign occupiers in a hostile religious environment, In the Baltic, the Order's conquests were gradually filled with settlers from Germany and other parts of Europe. Over time, these new Christian lands became culturally tied to the rest of Latin Christendom. And while the Holy Land Crusader states lasted less than 200 years, the Teutonic Knights' Baltic dominion endured for nearly 3 centuries. By the mid-14th century, the Teutonic Order had reached its zenith. They controlled not only Prussia, but also much of Livonia and parts of modern-day Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Their headquarters at Marienburg, Malbork Castle, was a symbol of their might, the largest brick castle in the world, housing the Grand Master and the central administration of the Order's vast territory. Pilgrims and knights from across Europe came to fight in the last crusade against pagan Lithuania, which remained stubbornly unconverted until 1386, when its Grand Duke Jogaila married the Queen of Poland and embraced Christianity. However, the marriage of Lithuania and Poland spelled trouble for the Teutonic Order. In 1410, at the Battle of Grunwald, also known as Tannenberg, the combined Polish-Lithuanian forces inflicted a crushing defeat on the Knights. Although the Order survived, its days as a great power were numbered. Over the following century, they lost more land, their military role diminished, and in 1525, the Grand Master secularized the remaining Prussian lands, becoming the first Duke of Prussia. So why is this crusade so little remembered? Partly it's the plain fact that simple narratives stick better than complicated ones. The Holy Land Crusades fit neatly into a grand East versus West narrative that has echoed for centuries in art and literature. The Baltic Crusades fought against scattered pagan tribes in Europe's far north simply didn't capture the same imagination in Western Europe. And yet, in terms of lasting impact, the Northern Crusades were arguably more successful. The territories conquered by the Teutonic Order became permanently Christian, and were integrated into European political life for centuries afterward. Today, the Teutonic Order still exists, not as a military power, but as a Catholic charitable and religious organization headquartered in Vienna. Malbork Castle still stands as a World Heritage Site and a silent reminder of the Order's centuries of dominance, and the Northern Crusades, though often overlooked, reshaped the map of Northern Europe, setting the stage for centuries of political and cultural change. The Teutonic Knights may no longer ride into battle, but their glorious and grim legacy still lingers in the stones of their castles and the histories of the nations they once ruled. Thanks for watching our video. Our goal is to share the truth and beauty of the West as far as possible, and YouTube is just the beginning of that effort. Help spread that message by liking and subscribing if you haven't already. And hit the bell by the subscribe button to actually get notifications when new videos drop. However, the heart of our work lives on Substack, where we publish in-depth essays, historical analysis, and cultural commentary that brought you to our channel. If you'd like to be part of that work and help support it, the link is in the description below. Until next time.